Welcome back to another episode of Consciously Clueless. I'm your host, Carly, and here we break down complex issues around health, the climate crisis, and social justice through a vegan lens. We'll talk about the magic link between your well being and the planet's health, because luckily, choosing a healthier, mindful lifestyle for yourself often creates healthier vibes for our planet too. Staying consciously clueless means getting to show up knowing nothing, but staying open to all that you can learn. From feasting on plant-based meals and reducing waste to learning to meditate, every step you take contributes to your wellness and makes systematic change for the world. You can make a difference. This podcast will show you how. So there are two voices here. So would you mind starting out with even just introducing yourself so listeners know who we are hearing from?
Yes, hi. Thank you, Carly. And hello, everyone. My name is Wasim. I am a Palestinian, currently live in Turtle Island in Canada, and I am a vegan food blogger, recipe developer, and I try to preserve our cultural and heritage and our cuisine with the recipes that I do, tying in the animal rights liberation into that, as well as advocating for my people, of course.
And hello, my name is Victoria Hertel. I am an anti-Zionist Jew. I'm a photographer and a healthcare professional and a vegan since 2011, and only recently have learned about being an anti-Zionist Jew ever since the genocide started, even though it's been going on since 1948. But ever since October 7th, I've been learning and unlearning Zionism and trying to advocate for Palestinians and other indigenous people, and especially advocating for families undergoing the genocide in Gaza by helping them raise money to evacuate and just to...
Thank you to both of you for the work you're doing. I am excited to dive in more to that. My connection to both of you has been through Vegans for Palestine. And I want to maybe start with some vegan journeys that are always good stories to tell. And it's one of my favorite questions because it's so interesting to me, all the different inroads that people find into this place. So I'd love to know what that was like for both of you.
Yeah. So for me, it started in just before 2020, personally, and it did start off as part of a challenge that wasn't necessarily focused on the animals, but it was more so on health-wise. I was taking up a monthly challenge in 2020. That was my decision as like a New Year's resolution type of thing. And one of them was to try to go vegan for 30 days. And that wasn't vegan January. I had no idea what that was.
I would love that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because as I grew with this journey, and maybe we'll talk about this later, is that I realized how much veganism is actually ingrained in my culture that I already practiced, but didn't necessarily connect to the overall animal rights liberation. And then, yeah, so with one of the months that I took on that journey, I didn't switch vegan overnight after that. I still took my time to learn, unlearn, and documentaries came along the way and reading some stuff. And yeah, at some point, I realized that really there's a connection there. And it's beyond what I'm at this point comprehending with how connected the world is. But at the end of the day, within that year, I came to realize how our individual actions as just living beings within consumerism also contributes to the animal suffering and very unnecessary animal suffering of that. Then connecting my ties and heritage and cultural and all that into how I feel about what I really stand for, what my values are, made the decision by the end of that year to completely cut out all of animal products and byproducts and start learning and advocating for that. I will have to say that it's still a journey for me as I'm learning how to incorporate that into advocating it with people that I interact with every day with my life. But I try to use my platform online with the community that I got in community with and people that I started speaking with and educating within that while using the food as a vehicle, let's say, to advocate for that. Yeah. And then, of course, you mentioned Vegans for Palestine. So also with that, I've been involved with that over the past year, making a connection for the overall vegan community and the Western vegan community that has turned a blind eye and has failed with the Palestinian community, really, and not made the connection within their actual values and ethics that I thought was there when I first learned about the 30-day vegan challenge that I took. Oh, it's interesting because as I'm reflecting back on that whole year, while it was very eye-opening for me, it was also now it's even more eye-opening because I'm like, oh, people are just following the trend of Veganuary. Vegan World Day is coming up soon. They just want to take part in that, putting hashtags, sharing food recipes. But not really making the connection of the values that stand behind that. And I'm trying to add to that within Vegans for Palestine in the work that we do, alongside Victoria and many others, of course. So I'll stop there for now.
I appreciate
you're-
that, Wasim, and I appreciate too your honesty about how it wasn't an overnight journey and how there were things along the way, because I think so often we see people, especially in social media, right, that we admire, that are maybe in a place that we wish we were or we aspire to be. Like, wow, that seems so amazing that he is vegan and he's a food blogger and he ties it to his heritage. And I think sometimes people think, oh, well, he must have been doing that his whole life.
Yeah.
Like that was just something that he's born with, and that wasn't my experience. So like, why try? So I love when people are like, yeah, it actually took a long time for me to unravel some of this, because I think as much as I wish everyone listening to this was vegan as of yesterday, that's not the case, and that's not in my control, and that's not the journey. So the reality of that is sharing that this is how it took me some time, because I think that gives other people permission to stumble along the way.
For sure. And then there's the element of being privileged to actually get into the veganism within, depending on where you are in the world. So
100%.
that's something that lacks within the
Yeah.
community. Yeah. Thank you, Carly.
I also slowly made my way into veganism. I was on and off vegetarian my whole life. My mom told me that I would spit out meat as a baby and I would only eat mac and cheese and French fries, and that was my favorite foods. And so
I mean,
throughout my
mac and
whole,
cheese and French fries, I think you were onto something at a very young age.
I mean, like that's all I need. So yeah, vegetarian my whole life. And then I went on this college trip called Geo Journey in 2011. And it was basically a trip across the United States, or Turtle Island. And I learned about Native Americans and the unfortunate genocide that we inflicted upon them. And then also I learned about how food was made in our country. And it really opened my eyes up to the horrors and the cruelty behind it all, not only for animals, but or non-human animals, but also human animals, people who work in the factories, and then the evil behind like Monsanto and how farmers are treated, and just everything, how it's all interconnected. So it made me realize, like, of course I love animals and I'm a vegetarian, but if I really love animals, I need to make the switch to veganism, because that is 100% the ethical route to take. And it was definitely a slow journey in 2011 where I was like, oh, I'll have this with milk in it. I was learning. I was very young. And now, and then I moved to New York and I learned about the animal rights community, and I would join actions and learn about so much more, and just became an ever evolving journey of learning, which I'm still learning. Like Wasim said, we know everything and we're perfect vegans. We're still learning, and just how I'm still learning how to be a better, ally as an anti-Zionist Jew for Palestinians, for other indigenous people, for Congo, for Sudan. So yeah, that's in a nutshell my journey.
I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing.
No
What was
problem.
the reaction for both of you? Did you have people in your life that were like, you're going to die of protein deficiency, you're not going to make it, or what are you doing? Or maybe even too, like both of you have talked about connecting these things to other issues, including veganism is sometimes a hard one for people, even other activists, right? Or even in terms of other vegans, including humans. And so were there any of that kind of tension in your life with these decisions?
I'm trying to think if there were any tension, but I will say that I am lucky and privileged to have a vegan doctor, a primary care doctor who believes in veganism and is a vegan.
Wow.
And it's funny because
See you in Michigan.
No,
Be there
literally,
soon.
she's not taking any more patients, because I tried to get my other vegan friend to go to her. She's like, sorry, I'm booked. I'm like, okay, you can't move. And if you move, I'm following you. But it's funny because the first time I just found her, I was just like, oh, I'll pick her. She's accepted my insurance, whatever. I go to her. She starts giving me the vegan spiel. She says, oh, you should eat more of a plant-based diet, blah, blah. I was like, wait, let me stop you right there. Are you giving me the vegan spiel right now? And she was like, yeah. I was like, I'm vegan. She's like, you are? I was like, yes. Oh my God, you just became my new favorite person. So, and she's, tested my blood. She's like, your B12 levels are amazing, this, that, and the other. I actually raised my calcium by eating more greens. I did a pre-medical kind of journey after I graduated college and thought of becoming a doctor, and did this DEXA scan where they test all your muscle levels and your calcium,
Mm.
whatever. So I did that 1 year, and then I ate more greens and stuff and did it the following year, and I raised my calcium. So it's possible to be a vegan and get enough calcium and B12 and protein, whatever.
I love that. Oh my gosh, I love that you have a vegan doctor. That's the opposite of the bad reaction. You found an ally.
Yes.
And for me, I mean, I think the most interesting things, of course, there are those that would be like, yeah, you're protein deficient or you don't have enough nutrients in you or whatever it is. But then I go back to saying, is it because the vegan diet itself doesn't accommodate for that? Or is it because your way of eating and your habits don't accommodate for that? And I go back to regular dishes that we eat all the time. Again, for me as an Arab, as a Palestinian, there's lots of like high protein ingredients, lentils, chickpeas, all of the beans, all of the legumes. There's a lot of, and like burghul or bulgur. So there's a lot of things that there's no issue with protein. And I'm not a doctor, so I can't speak on that, but I've never heard of anybody like people say this all the time, like nobody died of like lack of protein. And I don't know whether or not if you actually had zero protein, you would die or not. But at the end of the day, it's not about something accommodating to you. It's about your lifestyle changing in the way that you eat and the way that you consume, the way that you balance your plate, the way that you think of what you put into your body. So again, there are also junky vegans, right? So those may not be healthy. Just because you're vegan doesn't mean that you're healthy or you're going to be fine, but it's all about your mindset and the behavior that you take and how you approach that. Of course, lucky enough to have a vegan doctor as Victoria. I'd love that. So that can always have that talk as well. But I also have had opportunities where, whenever I want to do like any blood checks, sometimes once a year, I do that before I go back home or like before I go to Jordan to visit my family. So I do that and I'm fine. So everything's fine. My doctor's like, oh, you're good. And I'm like, yeah, I'm still vegan. So the first time I mentioned that, she was like, oh, like, but like, what about this and what about that? But lucky enough, she's Egyptian. So what about your hummus? What about all that? Like all of that have all the stuff that I need. So she's like, yeah, you're right. So I'm like, okay, cool.
Wasim, you said earlier that as you started diving into veganism, you were realizing that there was more connections to your Palestinian heritage than maybe you were realizing. Was that through a connection of food or was that something else? I wonder if you've had that experience as well, Victoria.
It was mainly talking about food in the sense that like the food itself is vegan friendly or naturally vegan, as I would say. And there's no issues of being vegan within our cultures. What I meant by that is that a lot of times when people ask me, oh, how can you be vegan and still be Arab? And like, you miss out on a lot of stuff. And I'm like, no, not really. I get to eat whatever I want. And I don't miss out on the cultural aspects of that because food for us is not just something that we eat. It's literal culture and stuff that we preserve. So I'm not really missing out on any of that. But then there's also the connection of I'm a Muslim. So there's also the connection of Muslims and the way that we actually perceive animals and want to treat them in a humane way. And there's arguments there on the sides. There's a part where like, no, if you're a Muslim, you still have to like contribute to animal suffering. While some may have that argument, at the end of the day, within following the book that we follow, which is the Quran, there's a lot of it that says you have to take care of the animals and like you're stewards, just like we know that we're stewards of the land, we're stewards of the animals. We don't own them. We don't abuse them. So yes, there are even to this day, a lot of cultural dishes that people cannot forego because they cannot see themselves being vegan and not having to eat that. But again, you got to dedicate to what that means. Does that actually contribute to animal suffering? And then some people will go and say, well, historically, when Islam was brought to us, people consumed meat and it's okay. And I'm not saying that nothing changed of that. Like I follow the book as it is and like I understand that and we can't change that. And I'm not changing that. But then you look at the way the consumption has been back then versus now, the way that industrial farming has been now versus back then. And is it really possible to get something halal meat that hasn't contributed to the animal suffering somewhere along the line?
Kosher.
Yeah, exactly. And mainly, and I have to emphasize this, actually, it's interesting because a lot of times people in the West have a very weird idea of Arabs and Muslims and other people within the region that the way that they look at veganism and animal rights in general. And that has a lot to do with racism, lots to unpack there. But what I wanted to mention here is you have to also consider the habits of the Western world versus the habits of the global South. And much of that is like people here in the West eat animal products and byproducts sometimes 3 times a day, like on every meal, versus back home, it's not the case. And when you look at what caused this, what is the contribution to animal suffering, it's not necessarily us that some underprivileged countries have been going through that they cannot stop consuming animal products, is that you're literally erasing farmland and destroying people's houses everywhere around the world and getting rid of forests and all that to feed animals so that then they can be slaughtered for us to eat. There's an issue there, and unpack that instead of attacking vegan people who are not vegan. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's my view on Western veganism.
Which is something I want to get into more too.
I remember when October 7th happened, and it took me a couple weeks after speaking with a Palestinian friend of mine who I went to college with, where I started making the connections of being like, oh, wow, Palestinians are in Gaza are being oppressed. And the whole point behind veganism is to stand against oppression, right, of sentient beings. And I remember just being so confused that the vegan community was not saying anything. And now I know it's because there are plant-based Zionists, not vegans, who stand behind a lot of these organizations. And then I found the community Vegans for Palestine, which was created for that reason, for the reason that there are no vegans speaking up against this injustice. And so I'm happy I found this community because we connect all the points, not only just with Palestine, but how everything else is connected with Congo, with Sudan. Everything connects back to colonialism, imperialism, and how that affects human animals and non-human animals. And it all really ties back to isn't real, right? They have a tie in Sudan and Congo as well. So and then when it comes to anti-Zionism as a Jew, I'm an Ashkenazi Jew. I believe in never again, and that doesn't just mean for white people. It means for all people of color, and that includes Palestine, Congo, Sudan, etc. I could continue the list, but it's a horrible long list, right? But so yeah, the idea is that anti-Zionists stand against the sovereignty, creating a sovereignty for Judaism, because Zionism is not Judaism. Zionism is a political genocidal ideology that was created by an atheist who was raised in a Jewish family, right? So it's just, I'm losing my train of thought, but basically it's just standing for justice, right? As a vegan.
I appreciate you diving into that, because I was going to ask if you would talk a little bit about what it means to be anti-Zionist, because I think that word now is becoming more and more used, Zionism, anti-Zionist, in public spaces, which is good, but it might be the first time a lot of people are hearing that and are, I think, confused about what all that means, especially for the Jewish community.
Yeah, I feel like it's funny, before this, I was trying to do a quick little search, and I was actually asking ChatGPT about the origin of Zionism, and Theodor Herzl, who was the man who created the ideology. And it kept saying, I was like, wasn't he an atheist? And it kept saying, no, he was raised Jewish and his religion was blah, blah, blah. And then it kept erasing my question, because I would say, I'm a Jew, and the Torah says that the Torah forbids Jews to have their own sovereignty and forbids to kill or steal. A sovereignty can only be established in accordance with divine will and ethical behavior. And it kept erasing my question and saying it goes against our guidelines.
Wow.
Which is just,
I mean,
so
why am I continue to be shocked at this bullshit? But like, what?
yeah, because I was like, I would not say that I know everything about anti-Zionism or Judaism, because I was raised in like a kind of a multi-faith kind of household where it was like Judaism, Christianity, Catholicism, Hinduism, Islam. So like a lot of things, a lot of religions shaped me, but I do try to research and learn about it. But I do know that Theodore Herzl was an atheist. He was raised in a Jewish family and was Jewish. And the ideology behind Zionism started basically as a land grab, right? Jewish people were immigrating to Palestine before the Jewish Holocaust. So we know that Zionism happened and started before that, and it has nothing to do with the Jewish Holocaust. And when Jews were first arriving, Palestinians and Jewish people were in harmony, right? And there are Palestinian Jews. It's not just white Jews. There's Palestinian Muslims, there's Palestinian Jews, and there's Palestinian Christians, right? So they all lived in harmony. Anyway, I believe anti-Zionism is, standing against the state of Israel, right? It's standing with true Jewish values, and calling it anti-Semitic is inaccurate.
True. So for listeners, when you said the state of Israel, you used air quotes, which I
Oh,
appreciate.
yeah.
And I would love to talk a little bit about, there's a lot of myths around not only the state of Israel, but the army in terms of talking about veganism, right? There
Yeah, the
was,
most vegan army. Yeah.
Most
Yeah.
moral army, yeah.
I
Yeah.
wonder why those two go together, moral and vegan.
ooh,
Most
Wasn't there
vegan
just iOS soldier who became vegan because he saw so much
army.
air quotes meat on the streets in Gaza?
Because he specifically, okay, so backstory for this, to my understanding, and I hope I'm not, because I haven't read the whole article, but I just only dug through this IOF soldier who took his own life because he couldn't handle what has happened and how he had done so much horrors to the Palestinians. And I just want to stop here and say that the weird part about all of this, regardless of what we're about to delve into in the vegan washing of it all, but the weird part about all of this is the journalistic evil manufacturing consent for things that are literally putting this to focus on him as a victim. The IOF soldier
Right.
that took his own life because he couldn't handle the horrors that he did. What is that? What is that? I can't. And
Boo-hoo.
the point of the whole thing about what Victoria was just mentioning is that apparently when they were interviewing his comrade that was there with him, he was saying how at one point they were in an Israeli tank and they were driving over Palestinians, dead and alive. And because he saw so much meat all over the place, he could no longer eat meat. And so now he's ethical and moral.
and to
and vegan.
clarify, he just saw desecration of human and non-human people and animals. That's when he's saying meat, he is saying
Yeah.
living
Mhm.
beings
Yeah.
splayed out.
Yeah. So
Right.
after having gone to see literal Palestinian bodies shredded apart and their insides out, because he did so, to those who were alive and dead on the ground, running over them, then he's like, you know what? I'm not feeling steak today. What is the absurdity in just writing an article and including that sentence in it? And of course, focusing on him as sympathize with the guy that just did this. And as soon as I read that, I remember, because like, it just crossed my mind about how wild it is. Because like right now we're talking about it and the three of us are just in shock about how such things are being said. But really, it's not that far off from what was done 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And then a few years after that, major vegan publications have come out and they're like, oh yeah, like the world militaries around the world should learn from the Israeli military and its stand on animal rights and veganism and its development and its ban of fur and it's all of that bullshit. But, who cares about the thousands of Palestinians that were killed during 2012, 2014, just 2 out of the 6 that has happened in the last 10 years. So what are we talking about when we're fantasizing about how moral the Israeli government is with providing its best people and best soldiers who are committing genocide with cruelty-free meals and cruelty-free gear. What is that? I cannot fathom people who literally jump into comments and say, well, at least they're not hurting the animals. Not hurting whose animals? Because, there are animals in Gaza too. There are Palestinians in Gaza. There are people in Gaza. And it's not just Gaza. There's in the West Bank. It's all over the West Bank. And those soldiers who get free leather-free shoes and boots go around in the West Bank, which is occupied territory, internationally recognized occupied territory, and they literally beat Palestinian children in the face with a leather-free, cruelty-free boot. So I don't get that. I don't get it. And I say this honestly, it's not even just because, yes, like when you look at it, it's literal planning and strategic propaganda that they have implemented within the Israeli army to show them as compassionate and morals. Because how could somebody who cannot hurt an animal hurt a human being, right? Like, how could that be possible? Of course, our soldiers are vegan. They cannot, if they didn't have to, right? If they weren't forced to kill Palestinians, they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it because they're vegan. They don't hurt animals. And it's just absurd. It's just absurd. And it trickles down, not just the army, but the whole society that are making vegan festivals and selling vegan friendly. That's the name of the brand, not just an association. They're literally called vegan friendly. And they're working with businesses and products to certify them as vegans and vegan friendly for those who are trying to make the switch and do better for the animals. And then when they get the chance, they go ahead and donate free vegan meals to soldiers because, and I quote, this is from the Times of Israel, the founder of Vegan Friendly said, "We cannot reach a point where our soldiers, our vegan soldiers, have to eat meat. So we have to provide them with vegan meals." And I can't anymore with this vegan world that the West is trying to pursue and make that this is what people should live like. We have major organizations, major animal rights organizations saying more militaries should learn from the IOF within regards to the animal rights. And it's, that's what vegan washing is.
Oh, my brain hurts because I'm trying to just spit out 48 mad thoughts at the same time. But for me, it speaks to how desperate everyone is to stay ignorant. How desperate everyone is for this to really not be as bad as it really fucking is. Because if you can find some way to make it feel better for your moral compass, right? Then you don't even have to think that it's as bad as it is. And it pisses me off, but it also makes me sad to think how we've been so brainwashed, we through these like war machines and capitalism and colonialism, to even watch people get to a point where that makes sense to them also makes me sad.
Yeah. And just to touch on that point, you said brainwash and you said how people are like trying to find at least something good in them. And you want to take this back about 2 decades when Brand Israel, a campaign that was issued by the government of Israel, specifically to target those in the West to make them feel more connected to Israel and feel like there is something that they can relate to. And they did a survey in 2005 or 2006 where they're like, yeah, most American people, and specifically American Jews, because they're trying to get them to come and make aliyah and settle and take over Palestinian land. So to convince them of that, first they did a survey, and the survey was like, yeah, well, we only see Israel as like militaristic and religious, and that's not something that we feel connected to. So the brand
LOL,
Israel,
first of all.
Yeah. So then the brand
Sorry.
Israel was like, let's see how we can make them more connected. And then they started doing lots of propaganda campaigns, literally by the Israeli government, from pink washing to vegan washing to greenwashing, all comes down from the government to specifically target the West. Why do you think the official IOF account for the Israeli military publishes Israel has the most vegan army with 10,000 soldiers in English? Why? Why is it going in English? So it's literally just to tell the world, we're good. Don't worry about us. We're doing the best we can. And if we have to do something bad, it's an oopsie. We really didn't mean to. We were forced to kill babies. Sorry. Like, That's the most apology Israel has ever issued. And I'm not even exaggerating. Like, this is a quote from the fourth prime minister of the settler colony, Golda Meir, who said, "We can forgive the Arabs for killing our children, but we cannot forgive them for making us kill their children." You can
What?
look it up.
The mental gymnastics.
That's the fourth
Yeah.
Israeli prime minister. So that's in, I don't know, 70s? I don't know. Imagine now. Imagine that is all fed from decades ago. It didn't start, obviously it didn't start October 7th, but it didn't start the year before. It didn't start 10 years ago. It didn't start with the siege in 2007. It didn't start with any of the occupying internationally recognized territories from 67. It didn't even start in 48, which is what the official recognition of the Nakba is. The first settlement was in late 1800s.
Right.
So you want to take it back then if you want to talk about the massacres that has happened ever since then, because what has been programmed not just from now, but from a while ago, because there's also a famous clip, which I believe, I can't remember if like within the last year or longer before that, the leader of the Israeli settlement in the illegally occupied West Bank, her name is Daniela Wise. She is on record saying that to convince American Jewish people to come in and settle and take this land and expand it, we have to do a lot of brainwashing. She literally says it. She literally says she has to do a lot of brainwashing.
Wow.
So I don't know what the world really wants more than listening as opposed to being racist, because that's what it is. It's not even about, we see this, and just tying it back to the vegan movement and the animal rights movement all together, is we see this racism depicted with Ukraine and how many animal rights organizations have spoken out about that. And they're like, yeah, everything's
Mhm.
political. We got to care about everybody. But now, no, we got to focus on the animals.
Yeah,
But
there
again,
was
who's
the
animal?
comparison of how they described children being murdered in Ukraine versus Gaza. And it was
Yeah.
strikes on Ukrainian children and then children found dead
Mhm.
for Palestinian.
Just by sudden chance, no reason.
Right. Yeah, tying back to the iOS being vegan, I just don't understand the whole point of veganism is to lift the veil, right? You see what this veil has been on you your whole life, and then you finally lift it and you see all the connections of the horrors, of the connections of all the oppressions, including humans and non-human animals. And standing with uh, every oppression is important. And I just don't understand, like, obviously it must be like a trauma response or something for them doing all this killing, right? So they have to be like, oh, I'm good. Or I'm vegan. I won't eat the animals, but I will kill them. And there are so many videos of all these animals, non-human animals, who are not only dying, but losing, limbs, unable to use their back limbs, still having them, but walking on their front limbs while their back limbs are carried underneath them. And the horse that was under the rubble that they were trying to get out of that rubble. And not only is this happening in Gaza, but it's also now happening in Lebanon, right? And the animals and humans are dying there. And I just don't understand the irony. Why are you vegan and you are not becoming, leaving the army, right? Like, why aren't you leaving? Why are you vegan, but you're still staying in the IOF? What is wrong with you?
I'd love to dive into too, like when we're talking about being disappointed with a lot of mainstream veganism not talking about this, and a lot of people that could use a platform to talk about this are silent. And there's a lot of reasons, there's a lot of complications for where that's coming from, but so much of it is racism within the movement. And I think that's become abundantly clear, and especially to people who, like myself, that is not my experience. I'm a white girl in this movement and was aware of these things, aware of the problems within the movement. But I think the last year really showcased how the vegan movement doesn't have a solid foundation of collective liberation right now. And I'm still trying to figure out how to change that. And I think we all are by Vegans for Palestine and having these conversations. But it's really frustrating to see. I mean, even if you only just cared about the animals, even if that was somehow how your brain thought about and defined veganism, like you just listed, Victoria, there's a more than enough for you to care about than there. Why isn't the
And
why isn't the animal rescue there being completely funded then?
the environment too. Like
Yeah.
vegans care about the environment, right?
Ecocide.
The ecocide is happening not only directly in Gaza and Lebanon and Sudan and Congo, but also we're connected, right? The earth is not just this, oh, this is happening here, so it's not going to affect me all the way over here. Literally, the bombs are destroying our earth, our air, our water, our land. That's going to cause a slow death for all of us, right?
If I may add on to that, because there's a lot of points that were brought up about why don't vegans really do anything about it or speak up and anything? And a lot of it has to do with individualism and consumerism and just wanting to find the privilege and the comfort in your own self to maintain the moral and the ethical life that you live. Because many of them depend on Israeli-made products, which come from the settler colony. And when they're here and they're obviously so developed and so civilized that they created the best vegan products out there, they come to the West and people now rely on them. It's literally getting addicted to the idea of, oh, how can I get the next realistic meat-like product or the realistic egg-like product so that I can not have to give up on not eating boiled eggs exactly the same way as I used to before. And then you're like, oh, but at the same time, even when you're learning about how that funds the Israeli, not just the economy, but also the IOF, because there are vegan companies who were founded in Israel and now they're operating in the US and now they're partnering with restaurants all over the place, literally to make money. And whenever Israel needs them, they go and donate those foods, those money to the IOF. And when people find out about that, all they think about is, oh, okay, well, at least if I were to not do that, more non-vegans wouldn't be interested in the movement because they feel like it's difficult to join the movement. And then you start saying, so you want non-vegans to join the movement because it's easy for them to eat vegan food, not because it helps the animals. And then you're like, okay, but at least Israel is like doing their best with doing the vegan products and like making laws like forbidding fur and all that stuff that they're doing there, completely ignoring the fact that Israel is one of the top 4 or 5 meat consumption countries in the world per capita. What are you saying? You're saying that it's just, oh, well, at least they're helping some animals, but really they're contributing more harm than good to the animals within Israel. What are you trying to get at? And then you really just get down to the racism of it because, again, it's the propaganda that comes along because Victoria just mentioned, if you're Israeli and you're in the army and you learn about veganism and you're like, oh, well, like that doesn't work with my moral compass and let me just leave and I'll serve my time, or I won't serve in the army and I'll just serve my time in jail, which is the very bare minimum any settler would have to do. You want to, again, I want to take it back to 2 decades ago. As I mentioned, Brand Israel was like 2005 or so. But in early 2000s, 2002, if I'm not mistaken, during the second Intifada, there was a vegan who refused to serve in the IOF because they didn't think that it was standing within their values. I don't know what happened to them. I know that they continuously report on the genocide, like right now, and like they educate about vegan washing and all of that, which again, bare minimum for somebody who refuses to serve in the army. But look at the timeline and look at what happened in 2002 versus in 2011 and 12 when, before Brand Israel, it was unbearable for vegans to serve in the IF. That doesn't stand within the morals, according to them. But there was a study in 2011, 2012 that basically did like talking to Israelis who are vegan, and many of them are like saying, well, yeah, what has Palestinians contributed to the animal rights movement? Yeah, of course, like Israel is doing good and we should support them because of the animals. So like a lot of brainwashing happened between that decade that literally ingrained the new vegan movement that has been birthed to take it as nationalism, as if it's like part of their national identity. And there's a whole article about that. It's insane because to me, I've never read so many words since I have in the last year. And many of them were regarding veganism and the way that Israel abuses the animal rights movement to enhance its genocide. And again, it's just wild that a government campaign can do that publicly to the world. It's not hidden. Like, no, it's not hidden. They partnered with Hillel, which is related to birthright trips, which is, again, all trying to just drive this whole settlement and settle colony project. You just have to read. And even if you had no knowledge of the topic, even if you thought it was complicated, which, by the way, after a year, I hope it isn't. It shouldn't have been even a year ago. It shouldn't have been 17 years ago. It shouldn't have been 76 years ago. But even if you were that naive because you were fed the propaganda and you were brainwashed to no fault of your own, which is just the mainstream media, you do not get to just look at that and be like, well, it's complicated because, like, on one hand, they're helping the animals. Forget about everything else. Just like, they're helping the animals. And I'm vegan, and that's what I care for. Nobody speaks for the animals except for the vegans, and I'm vegan, and Israel is helping veganism. So I'm a voice for the voiceless. Don't you hear that a lot? But not a voice for the oppressed. It's wild. I could go on forever on this, but I want to add one more thing is, we mentioned before, like, why should vegans speak of Palestine or advocate for Palestine? My simple answer is because forget that you are living in a country, if you are in the US empire and Canada, Turtle Island, or UK, who are funding and sending weapons to that. If you are a vegan anywhere, two reasons. One is that really the image that you want non-vegans to think about of veganism and animal rights movement? To just compare it to Israel and be like, they are the ideal, they are the leader in the animal rights movement. Is that what you want non-vegans to think? That murderous, genocidal maniacs are vegan, and that's the movement you want non-vegans to join? Is that it? Forget about that. No matter where you live, unfortunately, especially in the West, you're bound to come across products that are made in Israel or support Israel, even if they're not necessarily on the shelf, but in restaurants, serving it, whether it's that product literally donating to the IOF or the Israeli economy, or calling itself as an Israeli cuisine and trying to steal the Palestinian identity because you're literally contributing to the erasure of that. And that's why I tie it back with, I always, as I started with this topic, that year of my monthly challenges that introduced me to veganism, when I said that it reminded me of my culture and heritage and the practices that I already had been implementing within my view of veganism. I wasn't vegan, but I already had that. It's something that we already did, whether it's the food that we consumed or the way that we were raised to treat animals. A lot of restaurants in the West will claim the Israeli identity and the Israeli cuisine, and like showing that like hummus is vegan, falafel is vegan, all that kind of stuff, Israeli salads, all of those are Arab and Palestinian cuisines. And when you're going to those restaurants and contributing to that and you have friends that are coming to town that are vegan, they're like, many vegan influencers are going online, they're like, oh, what's like the best vegan restaurant I can eat in New York? And some people are like recommending an Israeli restaurant, and they go there and they're like, it's very nice. It's very vegan friendly. It's naturally vegan. It's a lot of hummus. It's a lot of falafel. It's a lot of whatever. And that erases the culture and the identity. And it's literally trying to adapt it into, again, vegan nationalism of the Israeli colony to show it that that's their culture. That's just part of their food. Because there are articles out there by pro-Israel publications online that literally say how like the land of Israel is by nature vegan, or like very like accommodating to vegans. And there's like the promised land of maple syrup, and I don't remember, like they literally made a title about how like glorifying that with veganism, trying to tie the religious ties of Israel with veganism. And it's just ridiculous. So yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that like at the end of the day, unless you're actively refusing to contribute to the vegan washing, whether it's by money, monetarily, or by culture, by erasing the cultural cuisine, you have to be active in looking out for that. And yeah, be cautious if you see anything like Middle Eastern cuisine or Middle Eastern food without specifics to what that cuisine is, because you could be contributing to it with your money and with your culture stealing identity.
Thank you, Wasim.
On that note, there are two apps that people can use, No Thanks and Boycat, Boycat.
Yeah.
Those are very helpful tools. And then, of course, BDS is the recognized boycott, divest, sanction movement to show all the different brands, right, and companies that you can boycott and divest from in order to hit them where it hurts, right, with your money. I talk with a bunch of people in the movement for Vegans for Palestine, and we're all so frustrated, right? We're like, why hasn't there been a change? What can we do? And it all comes back to money. It all comes back to
Campaign.
doing. Yeah. So if you that's that's an action you can take, and it's really not that hard. And you don't have to commit fully where you're like, I don't need any of these products, or I don't get gas from any of those. Like, you have to get gas, right? Unfortunately. But you can not get gas from certain companies, right? Or you can you could even go to your local gas station and ask them to switch to a different company, right? There are so many things that we can do with actions where you can either feel helpless and do nothing, or you can feel hopeful and do something.
Do you have, I wanted to ask this question later too, and I want to talk about some things you mentioned, Wasim, but since we're talking about action, I would love if you have other thoughts for people, because that's always a helpful thing, right? When you, especially if you are learning things that you have been ignorant to, if you are newly horrified by all of these kind of domino effect of the connections here, people are looking like, what do I do? I know that's helpful for me when I'm feeling overwhelmed, is at least if I'm taking an action, it feels like I'm doing something, right? So you mentioned boycotting brands that are supporting the IOF or Israel, and maybe putting your money other places, supporting Palestinians and businesses and restaurants. Are there other things that people can do, big or small, to feel like they're contributing in this movement?
Most importantly, always amplify Palestinian voices and just look out for what they are asking for. Because a lot of the times there's mutual aid that needs to be happening on the ground in Gaza that we can do something to raise awareness about. And believe it or not, there's a lot of vegan initiatives happening. I say a lot in the sense that it's way too much, but the point is that there's things that you can do to support that, whether it's an actual vegan organization or those that are contributing to vegan efforts. And that's because we're talking right now in this podcast to a community that is majority vegan, I assume. So if that's where you want to align your actions with, do that. And more importantly, or as importantly, make sure that you're supporting them financially, not just amplifying their voices. So there is a Vegan for Gaza initiative by Vegan in Palestine that has been delivering plant-based food parcels on the ground since the beginning of this year through volunteers all across the Gaza Strip, going through lots and lots of danger on the ground, just trying to source these ingredients and get the cash out and deliver it. So those are just some of the basic things that you can do, is just at least donate to that. Of course, answer the call for other Palestinians that are asking for help wherever you see it, if you're able to, or amplify it. And I want to emphasize actually 2 points that Victoria mentioned. One of them is with boycotting. Victoria also mentioned that you don't have to stretch yourself out. And it's really why I like BDS movement, is because it's not just boycott anything and everything that comes across your way, which I want to do as somebody who cannot put my money into something that's harming my community and my people. But then there's also targeted boycotting, which is specific to a limited number of campaigns that are most deemed to be effective based on collective action. Because if everybody did something different, it may not get to be effective, but if everybody's united towards 5, 10, 20 different campaigns, I don't know, that would be more effective. And we see this with, I think today I read from BDS that, not from BDS, from somebody else, that Barclays, which I believe is on the BDS list, has completely divested from Elbit Systems, which provides the weapons to the IOF. So while that is not something that, like, within the vegan community or like within the vegan movement, you should be aware of that so that you can at least find petitions for that. At least go to Barclays around you if you live in a big city and like protest, join those protests. Make it better and hold the vegan sign to show that people that there are vegans standing for Palestine. There's a lot that you can just simply show and combat the idea that vegans are against Palestine. You have to show up for Palestine and identify yourself as such. And the other point that I wanted to emphasize on, and maybe we'll wrap it up with, is Victoria also mentioned to try to take action to go to, whether it's a gas station or elsewhere, to be like, hey, find your business elsewhere, or you're not going to find our business here. So much of that relies on plant-based or vegan products that are coming from Israel. As I mentioned earlier, there's lots of restaurants and businesses that are working with those Yo Egg products or those vegan-friendly associations. Try to take action to visit those stores, speak with them, tell them, do you know who this company is? Do you know what they've been doing? Again, a lot of times some people don't know because that Yo Egg company is registered, I believe, as an American company, but it is from Israel. And one of their executives went to serve as a reservist in the Israeli occupying forces since this genocide. So you're contributing to a lot just by going, yeah, exactly. You see your face right there. And it's like, yeah, like that is it. Like we are paying money to companies because they're providing an easy access for us to be comfortable within eating vegan food because we think that it is not causing any harm and oppression and cruelty to anyone, while really they're not just serving, but also donating to them, at least during this genocide. So yeah, take action, go to those stores, go to those restaurants, shops, grocery stores. If you find anything by those companies and others, many others, yeah, do something about it. Let the managers know. If they don't listen, they refuse. Try to get more people, more groups involved, take it to the public, protest, take the product out. I don't know. There's a lot that we can be doing. And really it starts with just refusing to do this in your name as a vegan, if you want to call it that way, because it's coming in your name as a vegan in this case. So yeah, that's what I would say people should be doing.
And I would say too that for folks listening that aren't vegan, everything you said stands. Everything, all the actions you listed are things people can find ways and inroads into fighting for Palestine.
Absolutely, yeah.
Definitely. And then there also for the disabled community, there are other ways to get involved too, right? Like you can create content for families in need in Gaza who need help fundraising for their GoFundMe. You can do virtual things. I don't have a list in my head right now, but there are so many resources out there for the disabled community because I know personally I have chronic fatigue and pain from certain conditions that I have, but I can't be as physically active as I'd like to be in the community. So I try to do everything virtually that I can, but there's also local council meetings you could join, even virtually sometimes, where you can raise your voice and be heard. You can also see what native land you live on and see if there's any natives who need your help with certain actions locally. You can join the library and get a book. Join there's apps that you can sign up through your library and access even videos and movies and documentaries and audiobooks. I have a couple of those apps and I listen and learn that way too. And that's another thing that you can do if you can't be physically active is just learn and try to educate others in your community and your friends and family. More likely you'll reach your friends and family than it is you'll reach like the masses, right? Because your friends and family, they know you, they love you. They'll take the time to listen to you. So it's important to just try to have these conversations, even if it is uncomfortable. What else? You can obviously donate to mutual aid campaigns, find a family in need and just amplify their story. And if you can't donate, dedicate your time to one family at least, because I have so many families in my Instagram inbox begging me for help, and I can't. I have 5 to 10 families that I focus on, and that's even too much for me. If you feel called upon it, please find a family and help them.
I appreciate all of those suggestions. So something I would love to come back to that both of you touched on, and you mentioned in the beginning of the interview, Victoria, about how you've learned a lot in the last year, specifically about Palestine and about being an anti-Zionist Jew. And you mentioned, Wasim, about how it's something we all should have known a year ago, 10 years ago, 70 years ago. And I want to speak a little bit to that because I know for so many people, these conversations have been new in the last year. And that is by design. It is by design that these conversations are new to so many people. And I don't say that to give people like a free pass to not care, but just in the sense of a reminder that there's a reason that you didn't know. So if it feels really fucked up and you're wondering, And I think sometimes people also are like, I feel like that's so wild that I don't even want to think it's real, because then I have to think about how I contribute or what I do to take action, right? So I think there's a lot of people learning and unlearning in a different way. And I don't even know what question I'm asking you, more that I'm just sharing that both of you touched on that, because I think it's important to remind people that if you are feeling stupid or ignorant or bad or shame,
I
that's
still feel
not.
those things.
I do too. And I don't think it's okay to feel those things. I'm not saying to ignore it, but it makes sense. It very much
Right.
makes sense to have not known about these things and just to say that, yes, that is true and that is real and by design. And now what do we do to move forward? But I just think it's important to name how many people right now are being alerted to the horrors that have been happening for decades.
Right. I'm angry that I didn't know before October 7th. I feel like I had a very vague understanding, right? I thought, oh, it's a conflict, right? And now obviously it's not a conflict, it's a genocide,
Yeah.
it's a oppression, but I try not to dwell on that and just try to educate myself more and more as time goes on and acknowledge my privilege as a white person, as a white Jewish person, and try to be an ally for those who need me. And it's okay to keep learning. It's okay to not know everything. Like I definitely am not 100% all knowing of anti-Zionism and Judaism and the struggles that Palestinians have been undergoing through this genocidal regime. But I will keep learning and I will keep advocating because it's in my moral compass to be a vegan, to advocate for all sentient beings, right? So it's okay to not be perfect. That's one thing that one of my vegan friends, Taylor, told me. She was like, Victoria, you don't have to be a perfect vegan. You just have to be, you just have to care. You just have to do enough. And another definition of veganism I've heard is, shoot, what is it? Causing the least amount of harm possible, right?
Mhm.
You don't, you just cause the least amount of harm possible. Of course, there is harm in vegetable agriculture. Of course, there is harm in quinoa consumption, right? There's harm in literally everything. We cannot escape it, but we're trying to do the least amount of harm as possible. And I'm still learning things about veganism and
Mhm.
agriculture and environmentalism
Same.
every day, every
Mhm.
year. And it's okay to keep learning. That's honestly like one of the things I love about life is to have to keep learning.
Yeah. Just touching on that, because you mentioned the perfect vegan, and all I can think about is, again, I'm fairly new to the animal rights movement or being vegan. So let's say compared to many other people that are within the community, but it seems like that word is created like perfect vegan, or even at this point, just the word vegan is like, because you reach the title of vegan, then you think that you are more morally superior, as in you've achieved the greatest thing ever, and now you know it all, and now there's no blood on your hands. It's just wild that you can think that you can just be like, oh, I'm 100% vegan, or I'm a perfect vegan. Yes, aspire to be that. I just want to achieve that. Do every action you can every day to do that. But at the end of the day, you are paying taxes to an empire that is contributing to oppression at many different places in the world, not just in Palestine, not just in Gaza. And that's why I'm saying, like, being perfect vegan, because of individualism, all you think about is, oh, I feel so guilty because I've contributed so much harm to the animals. And now that I've found out, I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to not hurt any animal ever again. But are you doing it because you don't want the animals to be hurt, or because you don't want that guilt to come back? And answer
Oh,
that honestly. Because if you don't want the animals to be hurt, then you should not want oppression by default, not just to the animals, but in all living beings, because that's what veganism is about. So you achieve to do that. But if you are focusing on, oh, I don't want that guilt, I don't want to feel that anymore, that's individualism, and that's not going to get you anywhere in any movement ever. And just in the same way that there's no perfect vegan, there's no perfect activist, there's no perfect know-it-all, there's no perfect scholar. And really, I'm a Palestinian. I knew my cause since I was born because I was born into it. I never had the ability or the chance to be back home in my homeland because my grandfathers have been kicked out of it and forcibly kicked out of it, and we have never been able to go back home. But throughout being Palestinian and living in the West, which in a way, weird, I say this every now and then, I feel privileged to be a Palestinian in the West and not having to go through that harm every single day. But I also feel ashamed that I'm not there, just being within my community, being within my land. But being in the West itself has led me, because I'm Palestinian, because of understanding the interconnectedness of it all, specifically over the last year, I've come to learn that you can live in the West your whole life, be born in the West the whole life, and follow a specific thing that you were introduced to, if it's veganism, and not look elsewhere, just have the blinders on, just focus on the animal rights, and not really realize that, again, your taxes are going to many different places to cause harm everywhere, whether it's from the 2000s in Iraq, the million Iraqis that have been killed, whether it's sending your armies to Afghanistan, whether it's like a lot of things that we have been contributing to. And this last year has really woken me up to other oppressions and genocides that have been happening before our Palestinian genocide was publicized. There's genocide in Sudan and Congo, but there's also really, again, I'm calling like the West as mainly the US and Canada, but there's also West Europe, like all those countries that have also been contributing to that. But really what I'm trying to get to is understanding that racism, it knows no borders. It started and it has been going on and it is everywhere and all around us. And living in the West specifically and tying that back to being a perfect vegan, if you are only born in the West and have that blinders on and not looking anywhere else, you'll never understand truly, unless you expose yourself to it, the amount of harm that comes from the US empire interference within the global South, going to like funding and aiding the IOF that come back to the US to train American police officers to oppress Black and Brown people all over the place. What are you being a perfect vegan in if you're living in a country that is doing all of that, but you don't feel the guilt of eating any animal flesh? You have to connect those things.
I think that's really important. And of course, it's hard. Can't always be super nuanced on the internet and on Instagram, it turns out. People tend to take things as this or that. But I think that people feel like a lot of people in the animal rights movement I've seen get really defensive of, no, you should try and be a perfect vegan because you want to be perfectly anti-racist, right? You wouldn't say that in other movements. And I understand the sentiment, but I'm like, the reality is I am still probably undoing racist bias that I have that I was socialized to understand. There are still things that I'm unlearning, so I don't feel perfect in any category. And I think veganism included. And the nuance there is that doesn't mean you get an excuse to not try within your capability, right? It's
Right.
both. It's like
Yeah.
you do what you can in your capability while understanding the systems are not going to allow you to be perfect. But if there are people in the movement, and specifically in animal rights movement, I've seen a few people play that argument like, well, you wouldn't say that you don't want to be perfectly anti-racist. And my thought is, as a white person, is always like, I'm sure I still am. There are
There's
still
no way
so
we can be
things.
perfectly anti-racist. We're white. We're horrible.
I mean, hello, like this is the hi, it's me, I'm the problem. Whatever the fuck Taylor Swift
Hi,
says
it's
in
me.
that
I'm the
song, like
problem.
it's
Yeah.
me. So like I want to
I'm gonna try, but yeah.
Yeah, I want to make that nuance of if you have a ton of privilege and you hear that you don't have to be a perfect vegan, that's not some invitation to be like, whatever. It's an
Mhm.
understanding of systems that are not allowing that, but do what you can within your capability. And that looks different for all three of us.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I want to add on to that because racism, again, it knows no borders. And I meant that because, again, there is classes of racism, right? And there is like the war, the genocidal war in Sudan is not just within the US empire. There's also United Arab Emirates that is involved in that. And that is also racism that is not necessarily dedicated to the white people causing it, even though they're the reason there is split lands within the region. But the point is that right now, who is contributing to that specific genocide is not necessarily one that you would look at and be like, oh, you're absolutely racist because you think that only white people can be racist. It's just a weird thing to think about. And one last thing I want to add to that is that I mentioned when I said the perfect vegan, I said, sure, you can aspire to be a perfect vegan and work on everything that you can to be a perfect vegan. But again, as individuals, you can do your best to also be anti-racist. But again, the system itself is racist. The system itself is oppressive. And if you don't fight that and instead just think of an individualistic blinder set, then you're not going to get your whatever liberation in whatever movement you're trying to take part in. So yeah, get rid of that coin, man.
We got a lot of coins to get rid of.
Yeah, honestly.
Because both of you are inspirations to me, and I don't say that lightly. You're both doing work and you're both using so much of your platform, your time, your energy in this world to make it a better place. And that's really beautiful. But I also recognize that means you're seeing a lot of hard things. You are attuned to all of the oppression in the world, and that's really fucking heavy. And so given that, what are things you do to take care of yourself and to find joy while existing in 2024?
Oh boy, joy. That's a tough one. I want to say, I think I mentioned this a while back in my story somewhere. Could feel joy, but it's hard to be happy because you could experience the joy in the little things that refuel you, that recharge you to go back and do that work. But at the end of the day, it's difficult, at least for me and many of people in my community, to just be happy and live life as if it's normal, because it's not, and it hasn't been, and not just the last year, and not just for Palestine. But again, you don't dwell on all of the oppression that has passed by you by design to just be like, well, I give up. I can't be happy. I can't have joy. And it's, for me, really, I used to be, or I still am, as much connected to nature as I can by going outside as much as I can. But that has also taken a step back because my time is consumed elsewhere. So for me, whenever I get that chance to go out and be in nature and spend some time in nature, that is the most recharging and refueling to me. And it's even more so impactful now that it's more rare than before because I value it more because I don't get it as much. And because it reminds me of the privilege that I have to just go outside and look at the skies and the water and not have to hear the bombs and the Zandan all around me. So me being connected to my nature, but also not being disconnected from the reality of the world is what keeps me going. Not necessarily, even though there are moments of joy, because we cannot deny that we are human beings. If there was no possibility of people to have joy or experience joy, the Palestinian people wouldn't have survived for 76 years, because you cannot have gone through occupation and oppression and colonization and not experience joy, because having joy despite all of that is literally the biggest way to tell the occupation that we will not stop resisting in whatever way we can and we know how. And yeah, so experience joy, but never experience joy. And for me, it's connecting with nature, but never be disconnected from reality and always appreciate that blessing. And lastly, the community that I speak with, that I talk to, whether it's from Vegans for Palestine or elsewhere, people that I've never spoken to before, making that connection and even sometimes relating to a very emotional time is a moment of not joy, but a moment of recharging. So keep that community and choose it wisely and just cut out the Zionists because they're going to drive you down.
I appreciate that, Wasim. I was listening to a podcast called Movement Memos with Kelly Hayes that wrote the book, Let This Radicalize You. The podcast and my Instagram is so sick of me talking about this book. I read it and I'm like, everyone needs to read this and listen. But it's really good. And someone on her podcast said, we need the opposite of fascism. And the opposite of fascism is joy. And I've been thinking about that lately. I'm paraphrasing, but the idea is truly the opposite of fascism is joy was the point. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Yeah. So I appreciate
That's
that.
so funny you say that because I was literally going to read you a quote about fascism, which is it helps me be less helpless. So I was talking with my friend Tarek, who is in VFP, And I was like, I feel so helpless. How can this go on? What do I do? Like, how can I keep fighting this fight? And he said this quote by Chris Hedges: I do not fight fascists because I will win. I fight fascists because they are fascists. You don't keep doing it because you want to see the end or to see the that we win or whatever. You're doing it because it's morally right. It's morally just. And
Mm.
that's what I keep coming back to, is that quote, because it of course I'm going to feel helpless, because of course I see all the atrocities all over the world, and that's really important to me, is just to do it because it's in my soul. It's what makes sometimes people, my friends and family, who don't entirely get what I am about, veganism for anti-oppression, anti-racism, all that. Sometimes they say, wow, you're really like immersed in that. And like, how can you do that? You're going to be so sad all the time. You're going to whatever. And I'm like, I would literally be so much more sad if I didn't act on this call inside of me. I would feel like cancer is growing inside of me because I'm not letting it out, because I feel this call upon me to act for these people, for these humans and non-human animals. I have to. It's in my soul. But it is very important that I take time for myself to recharge. Like we're saying, going in nature is so important for sure. Go on walks. Sometimes I just take a social media phone break where I don't answer any messages. I don't go on social media, even though it's a huge part of my advocacy for Palestinians and the families that I help. But it's important to recharge and to take care of yourself in order to take care of other people and other animals, right? You can't fill other people's cups without filling yours first. And unfortunately, that's the case. And it's important, like Wasim said, not to be individualistic, but to be more community minded. And it's important to find those communities that you can help each other. I have a community of friends who we each create content for families, and we just brainstorm together and figure out, what funny things to post. And sometimes it's like satire things that make us laugh. And I always say, if we're not laughing, we're crying. So we might as well laugh, right? Because it helps like bring joy, because there's just so much sadness in the world. And yeah, and I joined this multi-faith prayer circle. I personally don't prescribe to any religion, but I forget the word for a person who loves all religions, but that's my religion, is to just love all religions. And there's this prayer circle held in honor of Palestine and other indigenous people through this Instagram called Heart of Earth _ and they do it every once in a while, and it's held through Zoom. And there's different prayer leaders. So there's Islam, Judaism, indigenous people, all sorts of faiths that come together and lead a prayer circle. And it's really healing, and it's really nice to have that community where they acknowledge the genocides that have happened and are happening. So yeah, and then just taking naps. I have fatigue, and I just take naps and honor my body, because I tend to push myself beyond my limits because I'm such a giver. I'm a Virgo. I love to service people. Okay. I want to help everyone and anyone in my own community, in my friends and family, and then across the world. And it's important that you honor your body and just do what it needs. Take the rest when you need it. Go outside in nature and just do what your body needs and not what you think you need to do.
That's a good reminder, and I appreciate you talking about taking action actually helps me feel better, because I saw a snippet of an interview with some it was like Jane Fonda, which that's a whole other conversation. But not that saying that everything she's said is brilliant, but someone asked her kind of like, why do you still care? You're whatever age and you're still an activist and you still are like talking about the environment as if that expires or something. It was, she said some things, and a little snippet I saw was, sometimes I feel like it's selfish. She's like, I'm taking action because I need to feel like I'm trying, because actually if I don't, I'll be in despair. And for me, despair lends itself very easily to depression. And I've done that. And I think about that sometimes, like, Sometimes it does. It feels selfish, like taking action. Well, it makes me feel like I'm trying, and if that keeps me going to try again tomorrow, I'll take it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't not do it. I need to do it. My soul needs me to do this.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because the moment that you, speaking of taking the action, because otherwise you would go insane, the moment that you allow yourself to go insane, you become socially normal because people that are online that are sharing regular stuff every day. And even though they go through people's stories, I see people that I used to interact with all the time within the vegan food blogging space that constantly shared recipes before using our food, our cultures, and many others. And now when it came to time to speak up about our oppression, they're just still sharing those ingredients. And it's like you have fallen into the worst level of losing humanity because using these ingredients have in the past contribute not just you using them, but like za'atar, for example, which is a spice that people use as a spice. It's an herb mix with thyme and sesame seeds and so on. But like now it's been so popularized and trend and like used on many different food items. But really, the Israeli government has banned Palestinians from collecting their own za'atar, which is indigenous to Palestine, because apparently it's like a cultural treasure that Israel needs to preserve or whatever. So let's just say you don't know that. Let's just say you don't know that, but there's so many other ingredients and regular food items like hummus that people use that they go through my stories. I'm talking about people who have previously spoken to me almost every single day or commented or helped each other with our content or whatever it is. And they still go through my stories. They still see no regular food items from me, but they see the education about those items and the ingredients and even calling out the cultural appropriation. And they like my story. And then the next day they're posting another hummus recipe and sometimes even calling it Israeli. So I don't know what people expect when they fall into that level of dehumanization. And it's funny, and it's funny because like it really exposes a lot about that. Exposed, we went way over time, but that exposed a whole other segment for me in the world that I used to live in. Even as a Palestinian in an online space, I used to think that I knew that online and being like on social media is not like exactly the real life. Obviously, it isn't. There are those that do their best of being like authentic and just doing their thing, but it exposed to me how much of those people were not even like paying attention to the stuff that we do as content creators with actual value as opposed to just recipes. So they just leave a comment, oh, I can't wait to try this, or like fire, or like whatever it is, or like amazing. And they don't even know what the content is about. And it was exposed to me the most because I'm now sharing like food related content, but talking about Palestine, but not the aesthetic part of it. And I'm still seeing those same people come into my comments like, this is amazing. And I'm like, it's amazing that people can't get food in Gaza right now? Or is the food that I put on the first 3 seconds of the reel looks delicious and you thought it was just the regular content that you can just drop a comment for so that my audience can see some other account and go to your page now and support your food content. That's literally how it works. Because like I was part of it. I'm still am, but like we go on our communities
Of
posts
course.
and comment on it. And they're like, and we say things to help our like exposure to our accounts too. But at least I try my best to understand what I'm liking, understand what I'm reading. Nobody reads all the captions, sure, but like that person, I hope they get this message, but that person knows exactly what I am and what has been happening to my community. And they still just treat it as, oh, just a piece of content that I can get someone to engage with my content at one point. And you've lost your humanity because you're acting normal and you're living in this world of consumers, and not just materially, but mindfully, and like just being online and just wanting to consume stupid ass shit. Sorry.
Don't be sorry. I'm sorry that you are experiencing that, especially when
Mhm.
you have at least decided at the time that it feels like you were in a safe community. You were like, oh, these people
Mhm.
understand and get it and are seeing me. When it feels like you've been seen and you find out later that you haven't been,
Yeah.
that sucks. And I'm really sorry that you experienced that.
That's thank you. And unfortunately, it's like an exact representation of how we Palestinians feel in general. because no matter how much, like one of the early posts that I've come across when I started doing social media, which was also in 2019, 2020, whenever something would happen in Palestine, and I would like try to raise awareness about that, because I haven't just been raising awareness over the last year. I've been sharing awareness since 2020, 2021, whenever Sheikh Jarrah, which is a town in the West Bank that people settlers went into to try to take people's homes, and videos went viral. And finally, social media had some sort of awareness about what's going on in Palestine. Some brands even took stance with it. One of the posts that I came across with that was the worst part about being a Palestinian, and I'm talking about this 3-4 years ago, the worst part about being Palestinian is having to educate people who already know about what's happening, and they just don't see you. Because every time something happens, every time an aggression happens, whether it's in Gaza or in the West Bank, and we share something, people are like, oh, I'm so sorry this is happening. And I'm like, but you knew. I don't want your empathy. Don't tell me you're sorry that this is happening. Do something to make it not happen. And don't act like it's just a one-off thing. So we just have to continuously educate about our struggle as we're struggling. And at this point, we're continuously having to educate about our genocide as our people are being genocided. And it's just wild to me. So yeah, that like those food bloggers don't really care. I don't care about them. I don't care about what they have made me feel, because at the end of the day, they're exposing themselves and helping me expose the way that is. And we need to distance ourselves from that. I'll wrap it up with really being in the movement of Free Palestine, for those that are not Palestinian or not related to this, should have at least exposed the biggest thing, which, as Victoria mentioned, it's not just a veil, but that you yourself, as somebody who doesn't live in Palestine, doesn't live in the region, you yourself are not free. You're not occupied. You are occupied. You're not free, and you don't have your free will, and you don't have your ability to speak your mind. Because if you were able to speak your mind, you would see the fascism that you thought and the terror that you thought was in the global south, literally in your neighborhood, literally in your backyard. And yeah, it's just.
And it shouldn't have to be in your backyard for you to care, or the threat of it being in your backyard shouldn't make you have to care. You should care because it's unjust.
Did either one of you have anything to share that I haven't given you space to do so?
I appreciate the fact that we can, like I said a minute ago, that people who are not Palestinian have come to realize that they've been occupied, but really it's just a moment for them to also decolonize themselves and their mindset, because it starts within you. And on that note, decolonize all the movements, all the liberation movements that you've been a part of, but only in an individual lens. So decolonize that and join the commitment of intersectionality, which people don't like that word, even though it's literally what we live for, as one land, one people, one planet.
That's something that we definitely didn't talk about, but how veganism, they say that, or the plant-based Zionists say that we shouldn't be bringing humans into the vegan movement. And I say to that, I'm queer, I have disabilities, and I also am a vegan. How can I not interconnect those things? And how can everything else, and also environmentalism, right? So we're vegan, so we can only care about humans, but not the environment. Of course it's interconnected. Of course we have to be intersectional. If you're not intersectional as a vegan, you're not a vegan, you're plant-based.
Agreed. I absolutely agree.
Thank you both for spending time with me and for sharing all of your experience and your knowledge with listeners. I know people are going to want to find you on Instagram if you want to share your social media handles or anything that you want to point people towards. Vegans for Palestine, that'll be in the show notes as well. If you want to send people to try out some favorite recipes and to learn more about traditional Palestinian food, where should people find you?
Yeah. Okay. So yes, go ahead and connect with Vegans for Palestine and unpack that whole vegan washing and learn about the vegan brands that you need to boycott, because they are complicit in the genocide of Palestinians and contribute to oppression elsewhere. And yeah, so you could also find me at Plant-Based Arab, where I share plant-based Arabic recipes and recipes from the Palestinian cuisine, which you should be trying to preserve in your own kitchen so it doesn't get stolen. And on that note, I want to mention that there is a new e-cookbook by Amnesty Canada, the organization that me and fellow Palestinian recipe developers and chefs have contributed recipes to that will be coming out soon. So if you want to learn more about the stories of recipes, do sign up for that to receive that e-cookbook for free. And you'll be able to preserve the Palestinian cuisine and not have to go to a Middle Eastern or an Israeli restaurant that serves you hummus.
And can people find that on your page or website?
Yeah, about the Amnesty, you should find it on my page. It will be up soon.
Great. That sounds good. I would love to get that ebook and maybe do a series cooking a few recipes for socials. That would be really fun.
For sure.
And it was really great to be a part of this podcast. And it was a privilege to speak with both of you. Always a privilege, Wasim. And you can find me on Instagram at Victoria E. Hertel, Hertel. And also, please check out Vegan in Palestine. They're the ones raising money to bring plant-based food parcels to Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, I believe. And then also Sulala Animal Rescue, of course. You can always support them. They are helping animals in Gaza. And then, yeah, please join the Vegans for Palestine community. You can join our Signal group chat through signing the solidarity statement on our Linktree and Vegans for Palestine Instagram. We would love to have you there. It's nice to have a little community where you can just talk about what's going on and have people who just understand. And then also, if you don't know everything, you can learn. I'm learning every day all sorts of interesting things through our community. And we also work on projects together. We also have a newsletter every month that you can get in your inbox. And yeah, definitely also just find your own communities and try to be more community driven versus individualistic.
Beautiful. Thank you both. This was really lovely. I feel like I could chat with both of you for a very long time. I kept looking at the
Same.
time and being like, well, I have 48 more questions, but I
Yeah.
Right now.
No, thank you very much, Carly, for having us. And we went over the hour and I'm okay with that, but I hope we didn't take too much of your time. But thank you for giving us that opportunity to speak and educate your community and your audience on that. So I appreciate that.
If you're hearing this message, you've listened to the entire episode of Consciously Clueless. And for that, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, tag me when you share in social media, or share this episode with others who may be interested in the topic. Any sharing truly means the world to me. Join the community at patreon.com/consciouslycarly for bonus podcast content like smoke sessions with Consciously Cannabis guests, video versions of solo episodes, monthly live calls, one-to-one support, more lifestyle content, mindfulness resources, and more. Until next time, stay consciously clueless.